Hey everyone, it's Ornlu, and it's time for another part of State of the Civs 2023. So for those who have not seen the earlier segments, State of the Civs is a short series I do around the start of a new year, where we take a holistic look at all of the civilizations in AoE2 right now, assessing not just how balanced they are, but also how cohesive is their design. Basically, do these civs feel like a natural part of the AoE2 roster? Are they unique? Do they have situations where they shine and situations where they struggle? Do their bonuses feel gimmicky or out of place? That sort of thing. In an attempt to quantify these fairly nebulous concepts, as well as to keep track of all of the different civs in the game, we're going to place everybody on a modified tier list. I explained what I mean by the different tiers in the first part of the series, so be sure to check it out if you haven't seen it yet. Of course, this is episode 4, and since we're going in alphabetical order, today we will be assessing the Huns, Incas, Italians, Japanese, Khmer, and Koreans. Lastly, if you guys are excited for this breakdown, be sure to leave a like on the video, comment on what you think of the civs we cover, and subscribe to the channel for tons more AoE2 content. With our formulaic intro complete, let's get into today's hot takes. We begin today with probably the most nostalgic civilization for any old school competitive AoE2 player, the Huns. These guys were added as part of the Conqueror's expansion back in 2000 and are classified by the game as a cavalry civilization. So if Mongols were the original steppe nomad civ in AoE2, the Huns are their barbarian precursors. It's all about aggression, raiding, and swift armies. This nomadic raider style manifests itself in the Huns' most memorable bonus. You do not need to build houses with them and start standard settings with 4 out of 200 population. This comes at the cost of 100 wood, but factoring in the villager build time, this bonus gives the Hun player some pretty solid wood savings quite quickly. This means they can go for any early game army composition quite effectively, with the faster working stables in particular aiding their scout rush. In Castle Age, things really open up as you can effectively go for both stable and archery range plays. Speedily training knights and discounted cav archers both can aid in applying a ton of pressure to the front of your opponent's base, or can alternatively go for more of a raid-heavy approach. Regardless, as you transition to the late game, you again have options between cavalry and cav archers, but for a typical 1v1, it's the cheap cav archers, hussars, siege rams, and relevant trash units that tend to be your most cost-efficient armies. Naturally, paladins and even Tarkans can work as well, depending on the situation. Although it may not seem like it looking at their tech tree, Huns can really hold their own in the late game on anything resembling an open map. Still, Huns certainly have their weaknesses. Not having houses can serve as a double-edged sword in the early game, as not having those buildings as part of a wall can make defending against a drush or men-at-arms rush a bit tricky. In an objective sense, the Hun tech tree is terrible, missing more units and techs than any other in AoE2, and this can be seen in their lack of gunpowder, abysmal defenses, and unremarkable monks. This makes Huns rather unfortunate on closed maps, and that is a big weakness of the civ. Late game water is also not something you want to be dealing with in any situation. Looking back to last year, I ended up placing Huns in the complete tier, praising their unique barbarian raider style of gameplay. You start the game aggressive, continue throughout the mid-game by applying pressure, and finish off the game by unleashing your horde of cavalry upon your pitiful enemies. The one thing that is underwhelming with this civ is their Imperial Age unique tech atheism. The effect is pretty weak, especially for its cost, but at least it does something now in conquest settings. Wouldn't hate to see it changed, but I also don't think it's a big deal. Regardless, we may have gone from the days of 1v1 Hun wars on Voobly, but Huns remain a very strong pick on any kind of open map, as well as most hybrid maps, especially the aggressive ones. They're great as a pocket in team games, but struggle on closed maps and full water maps. For those reasons, as well as the fact that Huns received no major balance changes in the past year, I'd safely say they remain in the complete tier. Second up today will be our second of the American civilizations, the Incas. This civ was added to the game as part of the Forgotten expansion, and was given the infantry designation in the tech tree. While I suppose Incas are the only civilization to have a 100% complete barracks tech tree, and they have a strong infantry unique unit, I still think the civ very much has a defensive identity. Among the American civilizations, the Incas have the weakest economy and are the only ones with no powerful military bonus, but to compensate, they have the broadest tech tree, best defenses, and strongest counter units. The civ gets off to a smooth start by having the free llama and extra house space, and access to the Eagle Scout in the early game gives you strong aggressive potential. Cheaper stone cost for your buildings and villagers that benefit from blacksmith upgrades starting in the Castle Age help keep your economy safe and give you time to switch into whatever counters your opponent's army. In addition to fully upgraded spearmen and skirmishers, as well as solid monks, the Incan army generally revolves around 3 powerful, gold-intensive counter units: the Kamiok to counter cavalry, and honestly most melee units in general, the Slinger to chew through infantry, and of course the Eagle Warrior to deal with archers, monks, and siege. Combine that with fully upgraded arbalests, champions, and siege rams, and you can see that there really aren't many armies in the game that this civilization cannot counter. Of course, this comes at a cost, as like I said, Incas don't really have much in the way of long-term economy bonuses or powerful military boosts. This civ is just not going to come out at the gate swinging like Aztecs and Mayans, and and are therefore not generally going to be quite as strong on aggressive maps. There honestly is not a map type in the game where Incas are bad, except as pocket and team games, but there also aren't really any where they break into the top 10. And that brings us to the problems with Incas. Last year, I placed the civilization in the somewhat problematic tier because after the removal of the infamous Noboru villager rush, this civ was really not seeing the light of day anywhere. Their team bonus of faster building farms was basically the worst one in the game, and their Castle Age unique tech of removing the minimum range for slingers and skirmishers was not much better. Their counter units are strong, but they're just that, counter units, not really ones that are likely to overwhelm the opponent with pure strength. In most situations, Mayans and Aztecs are just faster and have stronger bonuses. Still, over the past year, Incas have received a couple of changes. First, their terrible team bonus was replaced by giving spearmen and skirmishers +2 line of sight, certainly fitting with the Civ's identity, but not too powerful. Then, they got a sneaky buff to the slinger where they now benefit from the faster fire speed of Thumb Ring. Slingers were already good at what they did, so I don't really think this was the change Incas needed. As you can probably gather from my comments, I don't think these changes are enough to bump up the Civ from the somewhat problematic tier, as they just don't feel powerful enough in any given setting. That said, their identity as a defensive counter unit oriented American Civ is totally there, and their unique units are certainly strong. We just need to see a few changes before the Incas start to feel complete. Moving right along, we next turn to the Italians. This archer and naval civilization also hails from the Forgotten expansion and certainly lives up to its aquatic identity. In general, most people will think of Italians as one of the very best water civs, and with good reason. Cheaper fishing ships, age-up, dock techs, and university techs all combine to give this civ a very flexible playstyle on any sort of water or hybrid map. If the map is looking aggressive, those early savings can give you a fast uptime to stay competitive with your opponent, and if the map is slower paced, those same discounts can give you a fast castle age timing into either aggression or defense. On the land, things can feel a bit more generic, but the cheaper age-up once again helps in basically any strategy, and the Italian's broad tech tree gives the civ options in most situations. Furthermore, both of the Italian unique units are flavorful and useful, with the Genoese crossbowman being a rather slow to get to but powerful anti-cavalry foot archer, and the condottiero serving as a team mercenary that is fast, somewhat expensive, but boasting solid stats and a helpful anti-gunpowder bonus. Archers and gunpowder are certainly what this civ does best on the land, but unlike most archer civs, Italians also get fully upgraded cavalier and hussar, so there really is this critical mobility option to help them out on land maps. Of course, Italians also have their fair share of weaknesses. On the water, Italians may be flexible and powerful with all of their discounts, but when it comes to actual fighting, the civ doesn't have any bonus to aid in combat. This can cause them to fall behind naval civs with stronger military bonuses like Vikings, Koreans, and Portuguese. On the land, the issues are somewhat similar. You basically only have discounts, so Italians can fall behind civilizations that simply have more powerful economy or military bonuses. This is admittedly less of an issue on closed maps, where the strong monks and cheaper age-up makes Italians more competitive, but for open maps, this civ just feels kinda meh. So last year I placed Italians in the something is off tier. Having most of your bonuses come in the form of discounts feels a little boring, but nevertheless, Italians are strong in a variety of settings and boast some powerful and fun unique units. In particular, the condottiero is the only team unique unit that I really find well designed and flavorful. After all, they are literally mercenaries that fight for the highest bidder, and the anti-gunpowder bonus nicely reflects their utilization in the Renaissance, and in practical terms, the unit is useful in a variety of settings. In general, the playstyle on water and hybrid maps feels quite flexible, and even on land closed maps they can go for some funky plays. Still, in many cases, much of the Italians feels a little generic. Not necessarily in an underpowered way, Italians are at least decent in basically every map, but in more of a forgettable way. The civilization received no direct changes in the last year, and I have no reason therefore to change Italians from their something is off rating, so there they will remain for 2023. As we cross the halfway mark with these civ reviews, we go from one water civ to another, as our next entry will be the Japanese. This original Age of Kings civilization is classified by the game as focusing on infantry, and although they certainly do infantry quite well, I would add naval civ to that designation. These guys are all about a strong military focused on individual unit quality, and you can see that quite early on. Thanks to faster attacking infantry and discounted drop-off sites, Japanese have one of the best men-at-arm rushes and just early feudal ages in general. All of the wood savings can help you a ton on the water as well as on land, and the super fishing ships give that extra incentive to win water. Going towards the mid-game on land, Japanese have a ton of options from a 100% complete archery range to again the faster attacking infantry to cavalry with bloodlines and husbandry, and even some nice fully upgraded monks. This is why I was saying Japanese are a very military-focused civ. You just have a ton of strong unit options, especially in the early to mid-game. As things go on, the Japanese still have some options for the late game, as samurai can always deal a ton of damage, and this is complemented by arbalests, heavy cav archers, and faster attacking / packing trebuchets. So the Civ may have some very cost-efficient units, but you may notice a lack of a particularly pop-efficient power unit. Well, for the Japanese, that role is not so much filled by a unit as it is with their Yasuma keeps that can fire 3 arrows even when ungarrisoned. These can absolutely anchor down a push and make it very difficult for the enemy to engage you. At the same time, Japanese have their fair share of weaknesses. Their early game might be top tier, but once you get past the early feudal age, you tend to be pretty limited on useful bonuses as infantry falls off until late game, and the Civ doesn't possess much of a long-term eco bonus. Yasuma towers might be great in the late game, but they cost a ton of stone to get going and are not necessarily viable in all situations. Also, they aren't actual units, and combined with missing the last cavalry armor upgrade, Japanese find themselves a little bit on the slow side as far as late game armies are concerned. On the water, there are similar themes, as once the early game wood savings fall off, the Civ doesn't have any strong bonus to the warships themselves. This can lead Japanese to a similar situation to the Italians that we just talked about, as you need to rely on those early advantages to carry you through to the late game against Civs with stronger navies. Now, last year I went ahead and placed Japanese in the complete tier. Beyond my inherent Ornlu bias towards AOC Civs, I just feel like the Japanese have carved themselves a very noticeable niche in the game. That early game is super memorable for the Civ, as is the late game playstyle of trebuchets, towers, ranged units, and infantry. In a way, it's similar to Britain's in terms of unit types, but with the focus on sheer strength as opposed to range and finesse. As you might expect, the Japanese did not receive any direct changes in the past year, and I see no reason to move them from the complete tier. You could maybe argue they're a bit too strong on aggressive hybrid maps, but personally, I think Japanese are in a really good spot right now. Our penultimate Civ for this episode will be the Khmer, who hail from the Rise of the Rajas DLC, and according to the tech tree are a siege and elephant civilization. This is accurate enough, but more than anything else, I would say Khmer are an economy civilization. Both eco bonuses with this Civ are quite powerful, and when combined, give them a ton of strength throughout the game. The not needing any prerequisites for buildings or aging up bonus is a really interesting one, as saving the wood to unlock other buildings in the early game is quite powerful, but at the same time, you don't get those buildings, and that can serve as a double-edged sword. Still, the bonus is overall quite powerful, and that plus their farmers that continuously deposit food into your stockpile mean that this Civ is always set up well economically. Militarily, Khmer are focused on elephants and scorpions for their bonuses. The faster-moving battle elephants that can get extra attack for this Civ are arguably the best in the game, and having that strong economy to back that up is critical for such an expensive unit. Khmer scorpions with their extra range can be that much more potent at all stages of the game, especially versus archer units, and the ballista elephant now serves as the Civ's ultimate late game option. Of course, elephants and scorpions are still situational, and the Khmer tech tree is open enough so that the Civ can function even without those power units. In particular, the late game food income with the Khmer is a real shining point in any setting, and that can translate to massive hussar production and can often be enough to win a game in itself. As always, Khmer still possess some noticeable weaknesses. Their economy is great, but their tech tree is still only bare bones to get done what they need to in the context of having no military bonus for non-elephant and scorpion units. There are many situations where the Khmer simply cannot trade cost efficiently versus some of the stronger armies out there. On open maps, this is not usually too much of a problem, but on closed maps, the Civ can often find itself on the wrong end of halberdiers plus siege. Now, last year I ended up placing Khmer in the somewhat problematic tier, and I'll just say straight up, I was being way too harsh on the Civ. Although the strong economy and mediocre mainline military units felt interesting, particularly since the Civ still has those beefy elephants and scorpions when needed, last year Ornlu really had a problem with the ballista elephants and hussar spam. The former issue was solved with a balance patch this year, and the latter is I think not as big of a deal as I made it last year. I would rather see some small buffs to elephants and scorpions in general. So with that said, as far as Khmer themselves go, I'm gonna put them in the complete tier for 2023. Go ahead, call me inconsistent, but I feel like the Civ is in an overall solid position. Ballista elephants may be a little goofy, but when they got buffed last year to have 2 more attack on both the regular and elite versions, the unit went from absolute meme tier to totally viable as a post-imp deathball unit. Beyond that, Khmer are powerful on open maps and a little tricky on closed maps, but still with some options. In team games, they make a solid pocket Civ, and overall, Khmer just feel like a unique, interesting, and powerful civilization. We round out today with a civilization very near and dear to my heart, the Koreans. This Civ was of course introduced to the game in the Conqueror's expansion, and are classified by the game as a defensive and naval civilization. And yeah, that's pretty spot on. Koreans are all about turtling up and buying time until you can unleash the power of their late game armies and slowly grind down your enemies. For the defending bit, Koreans have plenty of useful bonuses, as in pretty much much all of them. In particular, the faster working stone miners and free tower upgrades make investing into those expensive walls and towers much more viable, while the free archer armor upgrades and wood discount for military units allow the Koreans player to supplement their defenses with strong ranged units. While a civ like Byzantines is all about defending with cost-efficient armies and whittling down their opponents throughout a game, Koreans are more about surviving until they get to their core power units, especially war wagons in Siege. War wagons are just one of the most cost-efficient units out there, and when combined with the extra range siege onagers, bombard cannons, and a halberdier meat shield, the Korean army just creates a death ball that is very difficult to stop. You also have the option for arbalests and hand cannoneers if you're looking for easier to get to ranged units, and those guys can also be garrisoned in your long range keeps to arrow down enemies from a distance. On the water, Koreans are a little bit on the slower side as they have no economy bonus, but they still have cheaper warships, a good dock tech tree, and arguably the best ability to lock down coastlines. Still, there are reasons that Koreans are not among the more popular civs out there. These guys are just really slow and possess no eco bonus or strong fast units that destroy buildings quickly. Korean cavalry is not great to say the least, and raiding with the civ is oftentimes difficult. As mentioned, the lack of an eco bonus means Koreans can fall behind on many different map types, so you really need to leverage the strength of their strong defenses and army. That said, I ended up placing Koreans in the something is off tier last year. The slow creeping playstyle might not be the go-to for many players, but I think it's good for the game to have a civ that is really all about turtling. Speaking of which, I criticized turtle ships, especially elite turtle ships, for simply being unviable in most situations, and I stand by that today. I've said it before, but there is no reason elite turtle ships should be even more outranged by galleons than regular turtle ships are by war galleys. My other issue was the implementation of the war wagon, which back then was terrorizing the latter in certain settings with various all-ins. But thankfully, FE was on the case, because the two changes to Koreans over the course of 2022 were to increase the wood cost of war wagons from 115 to 125, and then give the unit -1 cav archer armor. These nerfs largely keep the efficiency of war wagons in the late game, while still making them a bit more manageable in the mid game. Good changes all around. Therefore, in 2023, I will be bumping up Koreans to the almost there tier. Other than a buff or two to turtle ships, Koreans are looking to be in a good spot. They've really come a long way from their tower rush or bust playstyle. And with that, we have completed week 4 of our civ reviews. This week felt a bit smoother sailing as we had no civs in the major changes needed tier, and half the civs in the complete tier. Of course, I'll continue to try to release these once a week every Friday until we eventually get through all 42 civs in the game. Lastly, I do want to give a special shout out to my Patreon supporters, with Tristan in the Great Wolf tier, and then Elvinor, Carolyn, and Donnie in the Dire Wolf tier. If you're interested in supporting my channel further and getting some extra perks, the link to my Patreon is always in the description. But as always, thank you all so much for watching, and I'll see you guys next time.